Part 1 Commander Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiant and watched the holographic display flicker with incoming data. The alien fleet had arrived exactly as Earth's intelligence had predicted. 300 warships hung in space like deadly jewels, their hulls shimmering with strange light that no human had seen before today. Each ship was massive. Each one carried weapons that could crack a moon in half, and each one belonged to the Varkon Empire. Lieutenant Sophie Matthews turned from her console and her hands were shaking. She had been the first to intercept their message, the first to hear what they wanted. Her voice was quiet when she spoke, but everyone on the bridge heard every word. The Varkon Empire demanded surrender. 7 days was all they gave humanity. 7 days to hand over every military ship, every weapon, every defense station orbiting Earth. 7 days to dissolve all governments and accept Varkon rule. 7 days or they would turn Earth into ash and dust. Jake looked at the tactical display again and felt something cold settle in his stomach. Earth's defensive fleet had 60 ships. The nations of Earth had pooled everything they had, every destroyer and frigate and carrier they could launch into space. 60 ships against 300. 60 human crews who had trained for maybe 10 years against an empire that had been fighting wars among the stars for thousands of years. The math was simple and brutal. Earth could not win this fight, but Jake was smiling. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. He knew something the Varkon did not know, something that would change everything. Admiral Helen Rodriguez sat in the Emergency Council meeting high above Earth in the orbital station that served as United Nations headquarters. Around the table sat representatives from every major nation on the planet. Some wore military uniforms heavy with medals and ribbons. Others wore expensive suits that marked them as politicians and diplomats. All of them looked tired and scared because the Varkon ultimatum had given them only 1 week to decide the fate of humanity. The debate had been going for 6 hours now. Some delegates argued for immediate surrender because the alternative was extinction. Better to live under Varkon rule than to die fighting an impossible battle. Others pounded the table and demanded resistance. General Kevin Wright was one of those. He had fought in 3 wars on Earth and he had never backed down from anyone. He was not about to start now, even if the enemy could reduce cities to rubble from orbit. Dr. Nathan Cole sat quietly in the corner and said nothing. He was a physicist, not a soldier or politician. He had designed the faster-than-light drive that allowed human ships to cross vast distances in days instead of decades. But he knew that technology alone could not save Earth from the Varkon fleet. So he waited and watched and kept his secrets. Finally, Admiral Rodriguez raised her hand and the room fell silent. She touched a control on the table and a holographic projection appeared above them. It showed a ship unlike anything in Earth's public military records. The delegates leaned forward to see it better. Some gasped. Others sat back in shock. The ship in the hologram was enormous, dwarfing even the largest carriers in Earth's fleet. Project Leviathan had been hidden for 15 years. 15 years of secret construction, secret testing, secret everything. The money for it had come from black budgets and classified programs that most governments barely knew existed. The shipyard where it was built floated in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, disguised as a mining operation, protected by stealth fields that made it invisible to every sensor known to humanity. Captain Lisa Monroe had commanded that hidden shipyard for the past decade. She had watched the Supercarrier grow from blueprints and steel frames into something that defied every rule of naval architecture. The ship was 15 kilometers long. It carried more weapons than the entire Earth defense fleet combined. It had engines powerful enough to accelerate its massive bulk to speeds that would tear apart a normal vessel. And it had armor and shields built from materials that should not exist. Materials that human science had barely begun to understand. Engineering Chief Marcus Taylor ran the final checks on every system. The fusion reactors hummed with perfect efficiency, generating power that could light up a small continent. The missile bays were loaded with enough ordnance to flatten a planet's surface. The shield generators were charged and ready, capable of absorbing damage that would vaporize a conventional warship. Every system showed green. Every test came back perfect. The UNS Titan was ready for war. Captain Monroe stood in the command center of her ship and looked at the faces of her crew. 200 officers worked on the bridge, monitoring systems and running simulations. Behind them, deeper in the massive vessel, 15,000 more personnel stood ready at their stations. They had trained for this moment for years. Some had spent their entire adult lives preparing for the day when Earth would need its secret weapon. That day had come sooner than anyone wanted, but they were ready. Monroe activated her communication link to Earth Command. The quantum encrypted signal would reach Admiral Rodriguez in seconds, and the Varkon could not intercept it or decode it. Her message was brief and professional, carrying none of the tension she felt. Project Leviathan requests permission to launch. She sent the message and waited for the reply that would determine whether 15 years of work and planning would finally be revealed to the galaxy. Ambassador Peter Vaughn stood before the Varkon diplomatic delegation in a conference room aboard their flagship. The aliens watched him with expressions he could not read. Human understanding of Varkon body language was primitive at best. They had only known these creatures existed for 2 weeks. 2 weeks since the Varkon fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system and announced their claim to human space. High Commander Zexar spoke through a translation device that turned his clicks and whistles into mechanical English. He outlined the terms of surrender again, speaking slowly as if to a child. All military forces would be dismantled. All governments would dissolve. The population of Earth would be reorganized according to Varkon efficiency standards. It was the same speech Peter had heard 3 times already, but he nodded along and asked questions and proposed minor changes to the terms. Every hour he kept the Varkon talking was another hour for Captain Monroe to move her ship into position. The Varkon Empire had conquered 17 civilizations before they came to Earth. Their military doctrine was refined through 500 years of war and expansion. They did not expect resistance from humans. They saw Earth as just another primitive species that would submit or be destroyed. High Commander Zexar was confident that humanity would choose submission because that was what intelligent species did when faced with overwhelming force. But Zexar did not know about the Titan. His sensors had not detected the massive shipyard hidden in the asteroid belt. His intelligence officers had not uncovered the secret project that Earth had been building since the day humans first achieved faster-than-light travel. The Varkon believed they knew everything about human military capabilities. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Part 2, the diplomatic talks dragged on for 3 days, and Peter Vaughn played his role perfectly. He appeared nervous and desperate, exactly what the Varkon expected from a representative of a species facing extinction. He proposed changes to the surrender terms that meant nothing, asked for clarifications that did not matter, and requested time to consult with Earth's leadership on every minor point. The Varkon grew impatient, but they continued talking because they believed the outcome was inevitable. Julia Chen sat beside Peter at the negotiation table and monitored her tablet with practiced calm. The encrypted data stream from the Titan updated every 15 minutes, showing the Supercarrier's position as it moved through space on a carefully plotted course. The ship had left its hidden berth in the asteroid belt and was now approaching Earth from an angle the Varkon fleet was not watching. Their sensors were focused on the planet and the 60 human ships arranged in defensive positions. They did not see the massive vessel creeping up behind them. High Commander Zexar reviewed intelligence reports in his private quarters aboard the Crimson Dominion. His tactical officers had analyzed every human ship in the defense fleet. The analysis was not impressive. Human vessels used fusion drives that were efficient but slow, compared to Varkon propulsion systems. Their weapons were mostly kinetic projectiles and crude missiles. Their shields could barely stop a single volley from Varkon plasma cannons. The battle would be over in less than an hour if it came to combat. Tactical Officer Varix questioned why they were bothering with negotiations at all. The Empire could sweep aside human resistance with minimal losses. Why waste time on diplomacy when the outcome was already decided? Zexar explained the value of voluntary surrender with the patience of an experienced commander. A population that believed it had chosen submission required fewer occupation forces and generated less resistance over time. The humans would serve the Empire more efficiently if they accepted their fate peacefully. This strategy had worked 17 times before. Overwhelming military force combined with generous surrender terms usually convinced primitive species to accept the inevitable. Humanity would be no different. Zexar had led 3 previous conquest campaigns, and each one had followed the same pattern. Initial resistance, then negotiation, then acceptance. The humans were following the script perfectly. But on the morning of the 4th day, something changed. Alarm screamed throughout the Varkon flagship. Officers rushed to their stations in confusion. Tactical displays lit up with warnings that made no sense. A massive energy signature had appeared on their sensors, seemingly out of nowhere, and it was enormous. Commander Ryan Phillips sat at his station aboard the Titan and watched the stealth systems power down. Every holographic projector that had hidden the ship shut off in perfect synchronization. Every signal dampener that had masked their approach went offline simultaneously. The Titan's true signature blazed across every sensor screen in the solar system, like a newborn star. Captain Monroe stood on the command deck surrounded by 200 officers who had trained for this exact moment. Behind them, throughout the massive vessel, 15,000 personnel manned their battle stations with calm efficiency. Monroe gave the order in a clear voice that carried across the bridge. All weapons to active status, shields to maximum. Take position between Earth and the Varkon fleet. The Titan moved with grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Its engines pushed the massive hull forward at acceleration that would have torn apart a smaller ship. It positioned itself directly between Earth and the 300 Varkon warships, a barrier of human steel and technology that had appeared from nothing. On the Varkon flagship, chaos reigned. Officers shouted reports that their commanders could barely process. The ship that had appeared was 15 kilometers long. Its power output exceeded anything in the Varkon fleet. Its hull composition included materials that their sensors could not identify. Its weapon systems showed energy signatures that matched or exceeded Varkon military technology. Science Officer Kelvin ran the analysis 3 times because he could not believe the results. The human supercarrier was not just large. It was technologically advanced in ways that should not be possible for such a young species. The humans had somehow developed exotic materials and power generation systems that rivaled what the Varkon Empire had refined over centuries. High Commander, Zexar forced himself to think clearly despite the shock. The appearance of the Titan changed everything, but the Varkon still had numerical superiority. 300 ships against 1. Even a ship as impressive as the human supercarrier could not prevail against those odds. But as he studied the tactical display, something cold settled in his chest. The Titan was positioned perfectly to intercept any attack on Earth. Its weapons had clear firing solutions on his entire fleet, and its shields appeared capable of absorbing massive damage before failing. Admiral Rodriguez opened a communication channel from Earth Command, and her face appeared on every Varkon command screen simultaneously. It was a calculated demonstration of human technical capability. The Varkon encryption and communication protocols were supposed to be unbreakable, but humanity had cracked them. Her message was direct and professional. The surrender negotiations were over, but not in the way the Varkon had expected. Humanity would not submit. Instead, she proposed a different arrangement. The Varkon fleet would withdraw from human space immediately. In return, both sides would establish diplomatic relations as equals. The alternative was war, and Rodriguez made it clear what that would cost. The Titan carried enough firepower to cripple the Varkon fleet before they could escape to faster-than-light speeds. Behind the supercarrier, Earth's conventional forces stood ready. The battle would be devastating for both sides, but the Varkon would suffer losses that their empire had not experienced in living memory. Captain Monroe reinforced the Admiral's message by bringing every weapon system online. Lance batteries rotated to track priority targets. Missile tubes opened across the Titan's hull like the eyes of some massive predator. Shield generators hummed at maximum output, creating a defensive barrier that sensor analysis suggested could withstand sustained bombardment from dozens of ships. Lieutenant Alex Carter monitored the Varkon communication channels and listened to panic spread through their ranks. Some captains argued for immediate attack. Others counseled withdrawal. The unity that had defined the Varkon fleet was fracturing under the weight of uncertainty. They had come expecting easy conquest and instead found an enemy that matched their technology and exceeded their strategic planning. On Earth, celebrations began even though no shots had been fired. People who had lived under the shadow of invasion for days suddenly saw hope. The secret weapon had been revealed. The impossible ship that billions of people never knew existed now stood between humanity and destruction. News channels showed images of the Titan transmitted from every telescope and sensor that could see it. The vessel dwarfed everything around it, a monument to human ingenuity and determination. High Commander Zexar made a decision. He would test the human capabilities with a limited strike. 3 destroyers would engage the Titan while the main fleet held position. This would reveal the true capabilities of the human supercarrier without committing to full battle. If the Titan proved vulnerable, the Varkon could press their advantage. If it proved as dangerous as it appeared, they could reconsider their options. Part 3.3. Varkon destroyers broke formation and accelerated toward the Titan with plasma weapons charging. They were fast and agile vessels that had destroyed countless enemy ships across dozens of campaigns. Their captains approached with confidence born from centuries of Varkon military dominance. These ships had never lost a battle, and their crews did not believe they would lose this one. Captain Monroe watched them come with calm focus. Commander Daniel Foster tracked their approach vectors with targeting systems that had been refined through thousands of simulations. The Titan's artificial intelligence calculated optimal firing solutions and presented options that would disable the Varkon ships without destroying them completely. Monroe wanted to send a message, but she did not want to start a war that would cost millions of lives on both sides. The Varkon destroyers opened fire at maximum range. Plasma bolts that could melt through conventional armor streaked across space toward the Titan. Each bolt carried enough energy to vaporize a city block. The destroyers fired in coordinated volleys designed to overwhelm defensive systems through sheer volume of fire. The Titan's shields absorbed every impact without strain. The massive supercarrier had shield generators that could dissipate energy across a surface area measured in square kilometers. The Varkon plasma fire washed over the shields like rain against a mountain. The defensive barrier flickered with each impact but held firm with power reserves that seemed unlimited. Monroe gave the order in a calm voice. "Fire for effect. Disable only." The Titan responded with surgical precision. Lance batteries that had never been fired in combat activated for the first time. They did not use plasma like the Varkon weapons. Instead, they fired focused particle beams that humanity had developed specifically to counter energy shields. The beams traveled at near light speed and punched through Varkon defenses like they were not there. The particle beams struck the propulsion systems of all 3 destroyers simultaneously. The targeting was perfect. Each beam hit exactly where it needed to disable the engines, while leaving life support and crew quarters intact. All 3 Varkon ships went dark at the same moment. Their engines died, their weapons powered down, their shields collapsed. But their crews were alive, and their emergency systems kept the air circulating and the lights on. The engagement lasted 17 seconds from the moment the Varkon opened fire to the moment their ships went dead in space. 17 seconds to demonstrate that the Titan was not just large but deadly. 17 seconds to show the Varkon Empire that humanity had teeth. Across the Varkon fleet, silence fell as commanders processed what they had just witnessed. Their finest destroyers had been neutralized faster than most battles even began. The human supercarrier had not struggled or sustained damage. It had simply reached out and switched off 3 warships like someone turning off lights. High Commander Zexar stared at the tactical display and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Doubt. The Varkon Empire had faced many enemies, but none had ever demonstrated such overwhelming technical superiority. The Empire won through superior numbers and refined doctrine, but the Titan suggested that humanity possessed technology the Varkon did not fully understand. Strategic Coordinator Nexal ran probability analyses on his tactical computer. The results were disturbing. Even if the Varkon committed their entire fleet to battle, they would likely lose 40% of their forces before destroying the Titan. And that assumed the human supercarrier was alone. If Earth had built one such vessel in secret, they might have built others. The intelligence failure was catastrophic, and the strategic implications were worse. Captain Angela Price monitored the situation from Earth Command and watched the Varkon formation shift and adjust. Individual ships were edging backward, creating gaps in their previously perfect geometry. The unified front was breaking down. Discipline was eroding under the weight of uncertainty. An empire built on inevitable victory was discovering that victory was no longer guaranteed. Aboard the Titan, Captain Monroe reviewed the tactical situation with brutal honesty in the privacy of her ready room. The ship had performed flawlessly, and the demonstration of power had achieved its intended effect. But she knew the truth that the Varkon were still learning. The Titan was powerful, but it was still one ship against an entire fleet. If the Varkon committed to total war, the outcome would be uncertain. Engineering Chief Marcus Taylor reported from the reactor cores. All systems had performed beyond specifications during the brief engagement. The particle beam weapons had fired with perfect accuracy. The shields had absorbed Varkon plasma fire without strain, but sustained combat would test even the Titan's advanced systems. They had ammunition for a prolonged battle, but not an infinite one. Dr. Patricia Hughes reviewed sensor data from the disabled Varkon destroyers. Their technology was sophisticated and in some ways superior to human equivalents. The Varkon had not conquered 17 civilizations through luck. They were genuinely formidable opponents with weapons and defenses refined through centuries of warfare. Humanity's advantage came from innovation and surprise, not inherent superiority. The standoff continued for hours. The Varkon fleet held position but made no move to attack. The Titan maintained its protective stance between Earth and the alien armada. On Earth, billions of people watched the drama unfold through every telescope and sensor feed available. The tension was unbearable, but nobody could look away. High Commander Zexar called a council of his senior officers aboard the Crimson Dominion. The debate was heated and opinions divided sharply. Some officers argued for immediate assault. Pride and doctrine demanded that the Varkon Empire could not back down from any enemy regardless of their capabilities. Others counseled caution. The cost of victory had become unacceptably high. Tactical Officer Varix presented an analysis that silenced the room. Even assuming the Varkon could destroy the Titan, they would lose between 100 and 150 ships in the process. Such casualties were unprecedented in modern Varkon military history. The political consequences within the Empire would be devastating. Multiple high commanders would face disgrace. The expansion doctrine that had guided Varkon's strategy for centuries would be questioned. Science Officer Kelvin added another disturbing factor. The Titan's appearance raised questions that intelligence could not answer. How had humans developed such advanced technology in such a short time? Where had they built this massive vessel without detection? And most importantly, was the Titan alone, or did humanity have more supercarriers hidden somewhere in the solar system? The uncertainty was as dangerous as the Titan itself. The Varkon doctrine relied on complete intelligence about enemy capabilities. That intelligence had been proven completely wrong. Every assumption about human technology and military strength had been shattered in 17 seconds of combat. Ambassador Peter Vaughn remained aboard the Varkon flagship throughout the standoff. He maintained his diplomatic composure even as the situation spiraled beyond anything the Varkon had anticipated. His mission now was to provide the Varkon with a face-saving exit strategy. Humanity had demonstrated strength. Now they needed to offer the Empire a way to withdraw without admitting defeat. General Kevin Wright coordinated with Earth's conventional fleet and kept them ready for combat, even though he hoped it would not come to that. The 60 ships under his command were still outgunned by the Varkon, but the Titan had changed the equation. If fighting started, the human fleet could inflict real damage while the Supercarrier absorbed the enemy's main firepower. The hours stretched into a full day, then 2 days. The Varkon fleet remained in position but made no aggressive moves. The Titan held its ground, projecting strength and readiness, and gradually the realization spread through both sides that neither wanted the battle that would surely destroy thousands of lives and hundreds of ships. Part 4 High Commander Zexar spent the third night of the standoff reviewing 500 years of Varkon military history. The Empire had never retreated from a weaker opponent. The doctrine was absolute. Show overwhelming force and the enemy would submit or be destroyed. But as he studied the tactical displays, he realized that humanity was no longer the weaker opponent. The appearance of the Titan had fundamentally changed the balance of power. The decision he faced would define his legacy and possibly alter the course of the Empire. He could order a full assault and likely achieve victory through numerical superiority, but the cost would be catastrophic. 40% casualties minimum, possibly more if the humans had additional surprises. The political fallout would shake the foundations of Varkon society. Or he could find a way to withdraw that preserved some measure of honor and authority. Strategic Coordinator Nexal proposed a framework for retreat that would not appear as defeat. The Varkon would reposition for strategic assessment. They would establish a diplomatic mission to study human capabilities more thoroughly. They would negotiate trade agreements and border definitions. The key was framing withdrawal as a choice rather than a necessity. Zexar considered the proposal through the lens of Varkon culture. His people valued strength above all else, but they also valued intelligence and strategic thinking. A commander who avoided unnecessary losses while achieving long-term objectives was respected. A commander who threw away ships for pride was considered reckless. He could make the case that withdrawal was the strategically sound decision, but first he needed to know if humanity would accept a diplomatic resolution. He opened a secure channel to Ambassador Peter Vaughn, who had remained aboard the Crimson Dominion throughout the crisis. The ambassador appeared on the communication screen looking tired but composed. Zexar spoke directly without the usual diplomatic formalities. What terms would humanity accept to end this standoff peacefully? Peter chose his words carefully. Admiral Rodriguez had given him clear guidance on the boundaries for negotiation. Humanity would accept nothing less than complete withdrawal of the Varkon fleet and recognition of human sovereignty over this sector of space. In exchange, Earth would establish formal diplomatic relations with the Empire and consider future trade agreements. There would be no tribute, no concessions, no acknowledgement of Varkon superiority. The terms were harsh from a Varkon perspective. They represented a fundamental shift in the power dynamic, but Zexar recognized them as reasonable given the military situation. Humanity was offering the Empire a path to save face while avoiding a costly battle. He agreed to present the terms to his senior command staff. The meeting that followed was contentious. Several officers argued that accepting human terms would weaken the Empire's position across all their territories. Other conquered species would see the Varkon retreat and question their own subjugation. The risk of rebellion would increase significantly. But Nexel countered with cold mathematics. The Empire could not afford to lose 150 ships to prove a point. The military losses would weaken them far more than diplomatic accommodation. Captain Lisa Monroe maintained the Titan's defensive posture while the Varkon debated their options. She rotated her crew through rest cycles but kept the ship at full combat readiness. Every weapon system remained active. Every shield generator stayed at maximum power. The message was clear. Humanity could maintain this standoff indefinitely, while the Varkon had to make a decision. Lieutenant Victor Palmer delivered intelligence reports to Monroe every 6 hours. Varkon communication traffic showed increasing strain within their fleet. Supply ships were running low on provisions. Crew morale was declining. Several captains had filed formal complaints about the extended deployment. The Varkon were discovering that sitting in space facing an enemy you could not defeat was psychologically draining. On Earth, the days of waiting were almost harder than the initial threat. People had celebrated when the Titan appeared, but now they faced the uncertainty of not knowing how the crisis would resolve. News programs ran endless speculation. Military analysts debated whether the Varkon would attack or withdraw. Everyone waited and worried and hoped for peace. Dr. Nathan Cole briefed the United Nations Security Council on the technical aspects of the standoff. He explained how the Titan's advanced systems gave humanity an edge but not guaranteed victory. He outlined the probable casualties if fighting began. The numbers were sobering. Humanity would likely lose 20 to 30,000 people even in a victorious battle. The Varkon would lose many times that number. Neither side could truly afford the cost. General Kevin Wright prepared Earth's conventional forces for every possible outcome. If the Varkon attacked, his ships would engage immediately to support the Titan. If they withdrew, his forces would maintain readiness in case the Empire changed their minds. And if negotiations dragged on much longer, he would need to rotate crews because human endurance had limits just like Varkon endurance. Ambassador Peter Vaughn received a message on the 4th day of standoff. High Commander Zexar requested a formal meeting to discuss terms of withdrawal. Peter recognized this as the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The Varkon were ready to leave, but they needed the process to appear dignified rather than desperate. He agreed to the meeting and began preparing the framework for an agreement both sides could accept. The negotiations took another full day. Zexar insisted on language that portrayed the Varkon withdrawal as strategic repositioning rather than retreat. Peter agreed because the actual words mattered less than the outcome. Earth wanted the Varkon fleet gone. If the Empire needed to save face through careful phrasing, that was acceptable. The important thing was establishing human sovereignty and preventing future invasion. They worked through details of diplomatic protocols and communication channels. They defined the boundaries of human-controlled space and agreed that Varkon ships would not enter that region without explicit permission. They outlined procedures for trade negotiations and cultural exchange. Slowly, methodically, they built a framework for peaceful coexistence. Admiral Rodriguez reviewed the draft agreement from Earth Command. It was not perfect, but it achieved the essential objectives. The Varkon would leave. Humanity would be recognized as an independent power. Future relations would be conducted between equals. She authorized Peter to finalize the terms. Captain Monroe received the news that negotiations were concluding successfully. She felt relief wash over her, but maintained her professional composure. The crisis was not over until the Varkon fleet actually departed. She kept the Titan at full readiness and waited for confirmation that the Empire had accepted the withdrawal terms. High Commander Zexar signed the agreement in a ceremony broadcast across Varkon space. He framed it as the Empire choosing to establish diplomatic relations with a worthy species, rather than conquering a primitive one. The language preserved his honor and gave the Varkon population a narrative they could accept. But everyone who watched understood the truth. Humanity had faced down the Empire and forced them to withdraw. The Varkon fleet began its departure on the 5th day after the Titan appeared. 300 ships accelerated toward the edge of the solar system, where they could safely engage faster than light drives. They moved in perfect formation, discipline restored, but the confidence they had arrived with was gone. They had come expecting easy conquest and instead discovered a species that could match them, ship for ship and technology for technology. Captain Monroe watched them go and felt satisfaction mixed with caution. The immediate threat had passed, but humanity had made a powerful enemy aware of their capabilities. The Varkon would not forget this humiliation. They would study human technology and tactics. They would look for weaknesses. Future encounters might not end so peacefully. But for now, Earth was safe, and that was enough. Part 5. 3 months after the Varkon withdrawal, Captain Lisa Monroe stood in the observation deck of the Titan and looked out at Earth hanging in space like a blue jewel. The massive supercarrier had been revealed to the public and was no longer a secret weapon, but a symbol of human achievement. People looked up at the ship in orbit and felt pride that their species had built something so impressive. They felt safe knowing the Titan watched over their world, but the revelation of Project Leviathan had sparked intense debate across Earth. Some people criticized the enormous resources that had been spent building the ship in secret. That money could have funded hospitals and schools and infrastructure projects. Others argued that the Titan had saved civilization and proved that the investment was justified. Captain Monroe stayed out of the political arguments. She was a military officer, not a politician. Her job was to command the ship, not to defend the decisions that led to its creation. Lieutenant Victor Palmer brought intelligence reports from Varkon space, and the news was fascinating. The Empire was in turmoil. 3 high commanders had been reassigned or retired. The military doctrine that had guided Varkon expansion for centuries was being completely rewritten. For the first time in living memory, the Empire had encountered an opponent they could not conquer, and the shock was reverberating through their entire society. But perhaps more significant were the reports from other species that the Varkon had conquered. 17 civilizations had been watching the standoff between Earth and the Empire. They had seen a young species stand firm against an ancient power and force that power to retreat. The conquered peoples were beginning to question their own subjugation. If humanity could resist the Varkon, maybe they could too. Seeds of rebellion were spreading across the sector. Admiral Helen Rodriguez had retired after the crisis ended. She had guided humanity through its most dangerous moment, and now she chose to step aside for younger leaders. At her retirement ceremony aboard the Titan, she spoke to the assembled officers with characteristic directness. The threat had passed, but the work was just beginning. Humanity had earned respect through technological achievement and strategic courage. Now they needed to prove they deserved that respect through how they conducted themselves in the galaxy. General Kevin Wright took command of Earth's military forces and immediately began expansion and modernization programs. The conventional fleet was being doubled in size. New shipyards were under construction in orbit around Mars and in the asteroid belt. Defense stations were being established throughout the solar system. Wright understood that the Titan had bought Earth time, but one ship could not protect humanity forever. They needed a real fleet capable of defending human interests across multiple star systems. Captain Monroe received promotion to Admiral E and assumed command of the rapidly growing Earth Space Defense Force. The Titan would not remain humanity's only supercarrier for long. Construction had begun on 2 sister ships in the shipyards that had been hidden for so long. The facilities that built the Titan were being expanded to accommodate larger projects. Plans existed for a dozen more supercarriers, and the industrial capacity to build them was being developed. But technology and weapons were only part of humanity's new position in the galaxy. Ambassador Peter Vaughn led the delegation to the Galactic Council, a loose confederation of advanced civilizations that had observed the confrontation with great interest. Humanity's performance had impressed several member species enough to extend an invitation to apply for membership. The Galactic Council met in a massive station orbiting a neutron star 200 light-years from Earth. Peter arrived with a team of diplomats and scientists to present humanity's case. The council chamber held representatives from 47 distinct species. Some looked vaguely humanoid. Others were so alien that human minds struggled to process their appearance. They had watched civilizations rise and fall for thousands of years. They had seen empires expand and collapse. But they had rarely seen a young species successfully deter an established military power through pure strategic brilliance. Council Speaker Trelvana was a crystalline being whose species had achieved spaceflight when humanity's ancestors were still living in caves. She addressed the assembly with a voice that sounded like wind chimes. Earth's admission to the council was not guaranteed simply because they had faced down the Varkon. But they had demonstrated qualities the council valued: innovation in the face of impossible odds, courage when extinction seemed certain, and the wisdom to seek peace when war remained an option. The vote proceeded according to procedures the council had followed for millennia. Each species cast their decision based on complex criteria that included technology level, cultural compatibility, and potential contribution to galactic stability. When the results appeared, humanity had secured membership by a comfortable margin. Earth was now formally recognized as an equal participant in galactic civilization. Dr. Nathan Cole continued his research into faster-than-light physics and made breakthroughs that had implications far beyond military applications. The technology developed for the Titan was spawning civilian innovations: fusion reactors that could power entire cities with minimal fuel, medical scanners derived from weapons targeting systems that could detect diseases years before symptoms appeared, material science that would revolutionize construction and manufacturing. The secret project that had seemed like a waste of resources was generating benefits across human society. Jake Harrison received command of the UNS Defiant II, a new destroyer built with lessons learned from the Varkon crisis. The ship incorporated stealth technology similar to what had hidden the Titan. Its weapons included particle beams based on the same design that had disabled the Varkon destroyers in 17 seconds. Harrison took his new command on patrol missions along the frontier of human-controlled space and watched for threats that might emerge from the darkness. 5 years after the crisis, Earth received a transmission from the far side of Varkon space. It came from High Commander Zexar, who now served as the Empire's chief diplomatic officer. The position had been created specifically to manage relations with humanity and other emerging powers. His message was brief but significant. The Varkon Empire proposed a formal treaty establishing mutual defense obligations. A new threat had appeared in the galactic core, something that made both human and Varkon fleets look primitive. Admiral Monroe reviewed the proposal from her office aboard the Titan. The ship that had frozen the galaxy 5 years ago was now one of 7 supercarriers defending human space. Construction continued on more vessels that would extend Earth's reach across dozens of star systems. But the lesson of the Varkon crisis remained relevant. Strength was not just about firepower or numbers. It was about innovation and strategy, and the willingness to gamble everything on a calculated risk. Monroe recommended accepting the Varkon proposal. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers that no single species could face alone. Former enemies could become valuable allies if both sides approached the relationship with mutual respect. She sent her recommendation to Earth Command along with a tactical assessment of what humanity would contribute to a joint defense arrangement. Captain Angela Price analyzed the intelligence about the new threat from the galactic core. The reports were fragmentary and disturbing. ships that moved faster than anything humanity or the Varkon had encountered, weapons that could destroy planets, technology that seemed almost incomprehensible. If the reports were accurate, this new threat made the Varkon Empire look manageable by comparison, Lieutenant. Sophie Matthews monitored communication channels across the sector and tracked how other species were responding to the new threat. Fear was spreading. Civilizations that had maintained neutrality for centuries were suddenly seeking allies. The galactic balance of power was shifting again, and everyone was trying to position themselves for survival. On Earth, people looked up at the Titan orbiting their world and felt grateful for the foresight that had led to its construction. The ship had saved them once. Maybe it would save them again when the new threat arrived. But they also understood that one ship, or even 7 ships, might not be enough. Humanity had proven they could stand against ancient empires. Now they would discover if they could survive against something even more dangerous lurking in the darkness between stars.